and gentlemen, the role of a politician should be to put the citizens first, specifically the citizens of any metropolitan or the citizens of the country, and not to play politics for the purposes of raising our own personal self-interest or that of power beyond the interests of that of the citizens. Unfortunately, this is not what we are seeing with ActionSA. But before we get on to the main news story, can I yet again ask you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, and if you'd like to support the work that I do here, you're welcome to buy me a coffee. The link is in the description box below. So before we get on to the main news story, let's get on to some minor stories. The first is that the petrol price is going down on Wednesday by more than R1. So make sure you fill your cars up on Tuesday. This could see the petrol price being lower than R20 per litre in many parts of the country, the lowest price that petrol's been since February 2022. Whilst talking about the price of petrol, I did a video last week about economic growth in South Africa and about how the economy was rebounded. Well, news today has come out basically suggesting that the economy may grow by 1.5% next year. This is being driven by infrastructure repairs, a rally on the rand, and the JSE being at an all-time high. However, whilst an economic increase of 1.5 is great, considering that we barely breached 1% growth for the longest time, it's a far pale comparison as to what's actually needed to address inequality in the country. But I suppose at least it's a start. So onto the first story, and that is the story of Cilliers. As we all covered last week, Cilliers was removed from office. But you see, Cilliers did an interview at the weekend, and during that interview he was asked about the supposed dispute with ActionSA. And during that interview he claimed that there wasn't a dispute. He said he'd reached out to ActionSA to try and understand what that dispute was, but nobody really was forthcoming. Now, as far as we can tell from interviews with Herman Mashaba, it was basically claimed that the DA was conspiring with the ANC to remove her from office. I covered that last week in the videos I did. But what's interesting is Cilliers says he asked for the proof of that. He said that never happened, and Herman Mashaba has been asked that directly, and he's unable to tell anybody. He just says, yeah, I heard it, so it must be true. Interestingly enough now, ActionSA has come out and basically said that it transpires that the ANC may be fielding its own candidate for the mayoral elections in Tshwane. It's meant that ActionSA says if they do this, they're basically going to walk away from that coalition as well. However, Michael Beaumont says he's only heard this from other parties. I mean, he doesn't know if it's actually going to be true, and he doesn't actually want to negotiate all of the specifics through the media. But I think it's funny how he's not prepared to do that when it comes through to the ANC and the negotiations he has there. But they seem more than willing to do that with the DA. I mean, this was something that we frequently experienced when we did our interviews with Herman Mashaba. The guy frequently seems to want to cite how the DA is racist, but they can never tell you how or what they did to him. They just, are. And in this instance, here you can see he frequently says the DA backstabbed him, but he can't tell you how. It's just, they did, so trust me, bro. But more interesting was the actual allegation that Michael Beaumont said, if the ANC renegades on their deal, will collapse their coalition. So I gotta ask you the question, what's the deal? Because we heard the whole reason ActionSA voted against the DA was service delivery and, pay rises and salaries and infrastructure and whatever. But this seemed very much like the only reason that ActionSA stabbed the DA in the back was that they wanted to become the mayor of the city. A suggestion that I made on Monday. So in response to this, we've all heard the news that Helen Zille says that the ANC must reinstate Brinks, or they're going to withdraw from all the coalition agreements around the country, or at least the talks of that, to stabilise the metros. And then the ANC can account to the people of those metros as to why service deliveries failed. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call brinksmanship, and I don't think Helen should be doing it. It's not respectful to the ANC. This isn't how you negotiate in good faith. Now, Helen says that the whole Brinks removal shows that the anti-GNU faction of the ANC, led by Banyasa Lesufi, is actually getting the upper hand, a view that Frans Cronje seems to agree with. Now, you must all recall that the current Cyril Ramaphosa faction did the whole GNU agreement with the DA, and this is seen as a blow to Cyril Ramaphosa if the Gauteng leadership did actually go against the president's wishes and just got rid of the DA anyway. One must remember that the anti-GNU forces inside the ANC preferred an EFF and an MK coalition. Now you can see what those anti-Cyril Ramaphosa factions might look like, especially in Gauteng, because they're attempting to currently rename Santon Drive. They wish to rename Santon Drive to some Palestinian liberation fighter who hijacked a plane when she was 25. Not really done anything to South Africa, not benefited the place at all, but she's fighting for freedom for Palestine. You may say, well, why do we want to rename Santon Drive to her name? Yeah, 1 Santon Drive is where the US consulate is. Let that sink in. But anyway, regardless of how you look at it, it now appears crystal clear, at least to me, from my point of view, that the only reason that ActionSA got rid of the DA is because it's suffering because of the GNU. The DA and the ANC, to a degree, are both in the spotlight, is causing economic growth. I mean, we've just covered it in the first segment. argument, right? The economy is growing and positive things are happening. Well, that's all going to be attributed to the current GNU partners, of which ActionSA is not one. And so what you may typically tend to find is that ActionSA fears that when it gets through to the elections, it's going to suffer because the DA is currently performing and ActionSA is not. So this leads me to believe that potentially this power play was so that ActionSA could get its hands on the full metro and then claim to its electorate, look how great we are. We've actually had some governance experience, and that governance experience was positive. So vote for us. I'm not sure that that's really going to work, specifically when you look at her Shaba's tweets, which continue to be highly divisive and, to a large degree, racially charged. Talking of highly divisive, let's get on to the last news story, and that is the news story of the NHI. Now, for those of you who have heard stories of the NHI and find it boring, yeah, I understand, but obviously it's one of the most pressing issues in South Africa. Now, globally, if you look at healthcare is very interesting because it currently amounts for the highest growth sector in any nation on the planet. It's also the one sector that the majority of economies spend the majority of their cash. Let's just say healthcare is very lucrative, but healthcare as a whole is evolving because the current healthcare paradigm is set on curing diseases rather than preventing diseases. Now, if you take the arguments of doctors such as David Sinclair, who wrote a book on how to stop aging, his main central thesis is that healthcare needs to evolve into stopping diseases rather than curing them. And how that would be done is through tailor-made medicine, through health dashboards and wearables that monitor your health. As your body tends to get sick or shows signs of getting sick, you could go out there and get a designer drug. Effectively, if you think like a 3D printed drug that would be based on DNA slicing. It's all very science fiction, but we all know that science fiction eventually becomes science fact, which actually becomes problematic for the current healthcare systems, because the current healthcare systems are designed around curing diseases rather than preventing diseases. Now, many Western countries are starting to pay attention to this idea on how to action healthcare, which means that on a whole, many of them are moving or shifting their healthcare systems to prevention rather than cure, which means that if South Africa really wants to pay attention, it would start moving in that direction now, rather than working on an NHI system that in 25 years or 30 years would find itself obsolete anyway. And arguably, that's exactly how long the NHI would take to become fully embedded anyway. So we could spend 30 years arguing over it, and then by the time it actually happens, it's useless because it's out of date. So why is this important? Well, it's important because what that essentially means is that South Africa needs quicker wins when it comes through to healthcare reforms, rather than healthcare reforms that are going to take 20 to 30 years to do. And one of those potential proposed reforms have come through from Netcare in the form of the mandatory medical scheme, which would see all employed individuals given a mandatory medical aid scheme. One of the benefits of that is that it would alleviate pressure on the public healthcare system, place it in the private healthcare system, and allow the public healthcare system to basically do a form of rejuvenation or reform whilst saving some of their budget, because the budget would be split between the private and the public healthcare sectors, effectively a mixed system. This mixed system is something that they have in Germany and the Netherlands. So why would this mandatory healthcare system actually be really important? And that is because we all know that the fundamental issue with NHI, aside from government corruption and government inabilities, is that frankly we just can't afford it. Now you see, when the NHI was first costed in 2002, South Africa's unemployment rate was 26%, and at that point in time it was deemed unaffordable. Our unemployment rate now in 2024 is on the upward trajectory of 33.5%. So if we couldn't afford it when it was 26%, there's no ways in hell we're going to afford it now. And to a large degree, it seems like the ANC knows this. But that doesn't stop the Department of Health, who says, they still want the whole NHI thing, and the budgets are an issue for National Treasury. But you see, National Treasury isn't just going to pass budgets when it doesn't have the money. So effectively, the whole, we want to do it, but there's no money type argument is going to happen for the next 20 to 30 years anyway. So let's be honest, reforms need to occur, but the NHI probably isn't the answer, and everybody knows it. The problem is, what's the alternative? And that's very interesting, because the president engaged business units here in South Africa and said, tell us what all your areas of concern are, and let's have a conversation as to what the potential alternatives could be. Now, this whole call from the president is seen as a sign that the ANC itself may be falling out of favor with the NHI and looking at at potential ways that it could get quick wins. And the compulsory medical scheme is a potential quick win that may or may not work. I suppose, thinking about it from a logical perspective, kind of know the arguments that would happen. They would say, well, if you're going to force private companies to pay for private medical aids, then it will put a stress on those businesses, and that will reduce unemployment because, they won't be able to employ people. The similar argument they raise whenever we talk about raising the cost of potential domestic workers' hourly wage. We hear it all the time. Ergo, I'm not going to be able to afford my nanny anymore. Well, you can't have your cake and eat it, right? You need to basically pick one side of things. And at the end of the day, somebody's going to have to give somewhere. And you can let me know in the comment section below what you think's going to give. Anyway, that's it from me for now. Until tomorrow. Bye.